You are about to witness one of the best games in chess of all time, where world champion Garry Kasparov sacrificed the rook twice and brought back home a full point. At the end of the video, you're going to see a bonus question where you can test your real chess skills. This game was played in 1999 in Wijk aan Zee in Netherlands, as white plays probably one of the best attacker in the world champion Russian Grandmaster Garry Kasparov against Bulgarian Grandmaster well over 2800 at some point challenger of World Championship match Kasparov-Topalov. Ladies and gentlemen, probably have heard about 10 books which you should read before you die, or 50 movies which you have to see while you're alive, or something like that. And this series is about 100 games which you must know. And this is something which you absolutely have to see. This is a true masterpiece. Kasparov starts with e4, not a big surprise. d6, d4, knight f6, and soon after we got the Perk defense, which is not so popular nowadays, even though a lot of Super Grandmasters have tried it in the past. f3 and b5. Typically, when you get this pawn structure, white tries to attack on the king side by playing g4, h4, and so on, and they also include long castle later on. Meanwhile, black tries to gain more space on the queen side by playing b5, a5, and so on. b5, knight ge2, and knight goes on d7. You might be surprised why is knight going on e2 square, and why not, for instance, something like bishop d3. Modern theory shows that bishop d3 is also a good option, but Kasparov had a little bit different plans. After knight e2, knight e7, bishop goes on h6, takes it, and queen takes back. This already clarifies that black no longer can make the castle on the king side. It was possible to do that right at this point, but if white manages to trade off the dark squared bishops later on, h4, h5, g4 ideas might be very damaging for black. Therefore, black took on h6, queen takes, and played bishop to b7. At some point, black wouldn't mind making long castle either. a3, preventing b4, e5, long castle, and queen goes to e7. King b1, a prophylactical move. Here, white can't go for all in and throw the pawns on the king side and hope for the best, because black hasn't made a castle, and by the latest moves, it is obvious that black is planning to go for a long castle to keep the king on the same flank as the enemies, which probably can keep the king safer, but not really, as you will see in the game. After queen e7, king b1, a6, and knight c1. King b1 typically has prophylactical purposes whenever you play long castle. Just let's think about it. Whenever you make short castle, the king is already standing on g8 and the rook is on f8, but when you make long castle, there are two squares still available on the flank. Typically they just scoop over going on b1 to have the king on a safer spot. But this move also, except prophylaxis, has more purpose. Frees up the square for the knight, which potentially can jump on a5 square. And this is exactly what happened. After a6, knight c1, long castle, Kasparov found a good outpost for the knight and he went for it immediately. He takes d4, rook takes, c5, rook goes back, followed by knight b6. Garry plays g3. He wants to activate the bishop at some point as well, potentially on g2, it can go on h3, why not? Because the pieces needs to finish the development. King b8, knight a5, bishop goes back, and bishop h3. So far, all these moves are quite logical. White has finished the development and enjoys with a better position, because d6 pawn is clearly a weakness, a5 knight is doing an amazing job, white has more space, and so on. Black plays d5. It is essential to break through in these cases, because if you play regular moves like rook h e8 and whatever, white has all the time in the world. Can try rook e1, maybe even f4 e5 potentially, doubling up the rooks along the d-file, and good luck holding it for the rest of your game. So you've gotta create the counterplay whenever you have a chance. So Veselin plays d5 before white's rook gets to e1 square. After d5, queen f4 check, king goes on a7, rook he1, which looks quite logical, and d4. When you play the game in classical time control mostly, you get to that point where you have to decide to play more passively and sort of like keep the balance on the board and the same material, or go for very aggressive mode, which perhaps requires to take a lot of risks and you don't really see the future. It's not a surprise that Kasparov chose for active play and he went for knight d5.
Oh my god!
But it is important to understand your abilities of if you're capable of calculating with the very difficult dynamical positions, because I've seen a lot of people getting inspired by Mikhail Tel's sacrifices, going for some rook, queen, whatever the sacrifice might come, and they end up losing the game after 3-4 moves because they miscalculated something, ended up in time trouble, and so on. So be practical while you're making these decisions. It's cool to see Garry Kasparov's games, or Topalov's, or any others, you know, masterpieces, but well, they had over 2800 and they were playing a bit different kind of chess, so please be realistic before you make this kind of sacrifices. Knight e5, knight takes d5, e takes back, and queen goes on d6. It doesn't look like black has a worse position anymore. If the queens get traded, and maybe you can argue that rook e7 is coming, but there's king b6. Knight is completely misplaced, f7 pawn is hanging, but so is d5 pawn, and white probably is getting worse position at this point. So after e takes d5, queen d6, Kasparov had completely different plans. He didn't really want to trade off the queens, and he wanted to do something else. Pause the video, give yourself some time, and tell me if you found the right continuation. After queen d6, the best move is rook takes d4. Well, first of all, black has to accept the sacrifice. If he doesn't, white just wins the game on spot. So after rook takes d4, c takes d4, and guess what? Sacrificing one rook is not enough. Kasparov goes for the second rook sacrifice and plays a brilliant move, rook e7. Well, I guess Topalov was a bit shocked when he saw this double rook sacrifice. Accepting the second one is not a good idea, because it leads to a checkmate immediately. Queen d4 check. King has to go back on b8, where white plays queen b6. Queen b7 would lead to knight c6, but nobody's gonna play queen b7 at this point. Don't forget that the c8 square is controlled by the bishop on h3. Bishop b7, knight c6, king a8, and there is a queen a7 forced mate. So after rook e7, black has to play king b6. When this happens, white goes for queen takes d4, sacrifices the knight as well. King takes on a5, b4, and king a4. Well, Kasparov is down a rook and a knight, but obviously this king doesn't belong on a4. White can create a lot of checkmate threats, and this is what Kasparov felt before he sacrificed a bunch of material. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, because whenever we reach 10,000 subscribers, there will be a free giveaway video courses from my website. Queen c3. Brilliant mate in 1 on b3, black needs to react on it by capturing the pawn on d5 and rook a7. Now the task is a bit more complicated. White threatens this mate on a6 as well, and black's queen cannot protect both at the same time. So after rook a7, black plays bishop b7. Why not rook d6? This actually doesn't work because white has a brilliant move, king b2. And the threat of queen b3, queen takes, and c takes is unstoppable. Black can't do much about it. Therefore, black here chooses to play bishop b7. You might ask, how about queen d1 check? This leads to nowhere because after king b2, even this queen's trade, one move ago probably it was okay, but now since there is rook a6, it's not on the table. The rook a7, bishop b7, protecting the a6 pawn. Now white takes on b7. This move, king b2, doesn't work quite as well, Because rook a6 is no longer a threat. I know that white wants to play queen b3, but black can trade off the queens. And when this happens, since there is no mate and white is forced to take on b7, black is up a rook. Therefore, after rook a7, bishop b7, rook takes there. This rook is immune of capturing due to queen b3 mate threat. Queen goes on c4 and queen takes f6. If you expected that there will be a direct checkmate sequence, I have to disappoint you, but white has regained material balance. Almost. Only down a pawn, bishop and pawn for the rook. But come on, have a look at this king. Do you really think that white is down materially? Not true. So after queen f6, king takes a3. The moves such as rook d1 looks like it's an okay option, and after king b2 try to trade off the queens. But the biggest problem comes up after rook takes f7. White is not going after the checkmate of the king anymore, but does it really look that promising, this position? I don't think so. White can even try bishop e6, bishop b3 potentially, has regained the material imbalance, and clearly white should be winning later on. Anyways, after rook takes b7, queen c4 was played, queen takes, and after king a3, now Kasparov made a brilliant decision by capturing on a6 and after king b4 playing c3. This king has nowhere good to go. It goes on c5, at least there is rook c7 followed by rook c4, if not some mating sequence later on. And if the king gets to b3 square, it will lead to a checkmate in a couple of moves. Check, goes there, another one, and well, even though computer here is screaming that rook e7 is the best move, who's gonna play rook e7? Come on, let's just play bishop f1, take the queen peacefully, or even play rook e7 next after king e3, depending on the situation, and claim the victory. Anyways, after queen a6 here, and we get to that position, king c3 was played, which probably is the best shot, and queen goes on a1. King d2. Black doesn't want to walk on d3, because this will be on the same diagonal and bishop f1 finishes the game, so king goes on d2, queen b2 check, and the king goes on d1. And this is the critical moment of the game. I'm not exactly sure how far Kasparov calculated this variation. Maybe he felt that it was correct, and actually you can make this kind of decisions based on intuition, clearly, because if you have a lot of checks, even if you're capable of making some perpetual checks, the sacrifice is halfway there and you can consider going for it. But here, the best option, what you need to find, I believe cannot be calculated whenever you're taking rook takes d4. But you can feel that something is going on and follow your intuition. Kasparov played amazing move bishop f1. Attacks the queen on c4, and most importantly, if the queen goes on c4 anywhere else, which doesn't keep an eye on e2 square, let's say something like queen c6, it will lead to a checkmate in 1. So after bishop f1, by the way, queen takes f1, I think I need to mention it even though it wasn't played in the game, this will lead to queen c2, king goes on e1, and there is rook e7, and checkmate is coming next. So after bishop f1, Topalov played rook d2, aiming to trade off the queens, because if white here plays bishop c4, there's rook b2, king takes, b takes c4, it will lead to a rook ending where white is down a pawn. So after rook d2, another amazing move, and Kasparov has sacrificed the rook the third time. He went for rook d7.
Nice.
Well, this queen is immune of capturing due to the threat along the d file, and if rook d7 comes next, there will be bishop takes c4, which doesn't look really promising for black, which actually was played in the game, and the rook also on h8 is under attack. Not to mention that queen e2 is coming on the next move. Before we go farther, after rook d2, probably there is nothing else for white. There's no queen c1, no queen c2, nothing else, just rook d7. Anyways, since the biggest threat is queen d2 mate, and not just capturing the queen on c4, black took the rook on d7, bishop takes c4, pawn takes back, queen h8. Topalov kept playing for a couple of extra moves, because, okay, you can imagine if the pawn gets to c3 square after playing rook d3, it might be a bit difficult if white doesn't find the right plan, but Kasparov found it, played queen a8, c3, queen a4 check, making sure that the king is getting kicked out from d1 square, and now played even f4. There's no danger, c2 is not coming anytime soon, and after f5, played king c1, rook d2, followed by queen a7. This pawn can't make any progress, queen takes h7 is coming, queen e3 check is in the air, followed by queen c3 next, and obviously Topalov has seen enough, threw in the towel and resigned. And this is the bonus question. Can you spot the winning move for black? Let me know in the comment section down below.